Okay, so this is a correspondence between the Rebbe and a young teenager. The Rebbe's response is thoughtful, as we will see. The Rebbe takes his questions into consideration, and in that sense, the Rebbe is very thoughtful. We will see, which is very interesting, which is the next 2 points, that the Rebbe talks to this young boy as if he is talking to a contemporary Torah scholar, bringing proof, sources to his quotes and quotes from the sages. So the Rebbe doesn't just give him a simple answer, as one might do to a 13, 14-year-old who's asking a question, try to simplify the answer. But the Rebbe gives this young man intriguing answers, I should say, answers that come from, as we'll see, the book of Tanya and other Jewish sources. How do we know what was written to the Rebbe? Because this young man eventually shared the story behind his correspondence. So knowing the background to this correspondence makes it very interesting. Because I think, having read the letter, I would have thought that maybe it's someone in their late 20s, 30s who's struggling. That's what I would have thought, having read the letter without this introduction. The context of the boy's letter is that the boy is feeling very down. And he says that it seems obvious, and I'll give you a little background to this. What's happening is this boy has heard many stories about people who amounted to greatness. And while for some people, it's nice to hear stories of great individuals, for some people, hearing about great individuals when I'm struggling can be a letdown. Because the way I could interpret it is that those people who were so great, talk about Moses, for example. Talk about Moses. Moses, when he was born, his whole house lit up. Moses, we are taught, it says that when he was born, he was so great that he was already born, he was born circumcised, which showed on his greatness, because the circumcision is a sign of a bond between us and the Creator. And so Moses already had that bond. So if I start telling you stories about great people and you're not feeling very confident about yourself, you start to think to yourself, well, I'm never going to be able to grow like these great people because they were great when they were younger. Which is, by the way, one of the reasons why I love the stories of the challenges of King David. Because I relate to it. I relate to those stories. We all have challenges. And King David was someone who had tremendous challenges, as we know. King David had tremendous challenges and was able to overcome them. So to me, King David is someone that I could relate to. But when I think about Moses, I think about the Rebbe, and if I think in the context of myself growing and becoming something in my life, I could be let down and think to myself, well, what am I going to become? How could I compare myself to these great people? They were already great when they were younger, and I'm still struggling in my life, and that makes it very difficult. So the boy writes, obviously, I'm not going to amount to anything special. If I were destined for greatness, I would have achieved something like that by now, which means even at 13, 14 years old, because all these great people already at 13, 14 years old, they had already amounted to something. So here's the Rebbe's letter, or the Rebbe's response. In the previous 2 weeks, we read the entire letter, and then I went through section after section, which I found myself a little confusing. It's just the way JLI set it up. They only set up the letter and then one or two slides. So all the rest of the slides are mine. So this week I had a little extra time today. I made the extra time because I found it a little bit difficult to read through the whole letter and then sort of take it apart that way. So I have prepared the entire, each sections of the letter and slideshows after each section so that we can go through and try to understand and appreciate what the Rebbe is writing to this young man. So this letter is written in Adar in March of 1958. The Rebbe always began his letters, greetings and blessing. In Hebrew, it would be Shalom Uvracha. In response to your letter, dated Adar 15th, which is Shushan Purim, the day after Purim, which is known as Shushan Purim, where in the capital of Persia, which was Shushan, they celebrated Purim the day later because they had an extra day to defend themselves and fight the enemy. Today in Israel, in Jerusalem, Purim is celebrated a day later, and that is called Shushan Purim. For us, the day after Purim is a day when we consider it a holiday. There's certain prayers that we don't say because it's a special day, but it's not a Purim. We don't do the mitzvahs of Purim on that day, in which you write about your spiritual condition and ask for advice in this regard. You will find the answers to all your questions in the book Tanya, which I'm sure you have. I also trust that your edition of Tanya has the index of topics, which will help in you in your search. Now, today, the Tanya, which is the Bible of Hasidim, of Hasidicism, of Hasidic philosophy. It's a philosophical and mystical teachings, and it's also a psychological self-help guide. Now, today we have the book of Tanya translated into many languages. Not only is the Tanya translated into many languages, the Tanya has been printed almost every place in the world. Wherever there's a Chabad, and I think even in places where there's no Chabad, I shouldn't say I think, I know. For example, in Egypt today, there's no Chabad, but the Tanya has been printed there, and the Tanya has been printed in many places, even where there isn't a Chabad. The Rebbe had made a campaign in the 80s, the early 80s, that he wanted the Tanya to be printed in every single place. I have shared that the book of Tanya was 200 years, several years ago, since the Alter Rebbe's passing. And I wanted to print the Tanya in Old Japan, and I was considering it and talking about it. And during that time, which was very strange, I got a phone call. And there's a friend of mine, another Chabad rabbi, who tells me that someone he knows in Muncie found a suitcase filled with Tanyas. And this suitcase has Tanyas that were printed all over New Jersey. And there is a Tanya there that was printed in Old Japan, 1984. What was the story? So when the Rebbe made this campaign, there was a young rabbi by the name of, his name, his father-in-law is the Chabad rabbi for the Russian community in Fair Lawn, Rabbi Zaltzman. His son now is the junior Chabad rabbi, a friend of mine. So his brother-in-law, who was a young rabbi at the time, went around with a truck, with a printer on the back of the truck, and he printed Tanyas all over New Jersey. And it's interesting, I think it seemed from the Tanyas that he doesn't remember the details of where he went, as I spoke to him about it, but it seems from the few Tanyas that I saw that he went to central towns. Now, Old Japan is a central town in relationship to Harrington Park, Norwood. The high school is in Old Japan. So he printed the Tanya in Old Japan in 1984 on the back of a truck. And I have about 10, 15 copies of this Tanya. The Tanya, as the Alter Rebbe writes in his introduction to the book of Tanya, discussing how the community has grown, the requests that people write to him, the personal requests have become numerous, and therefore, the Rebbe writes, I have therefore recorded all the replies to all the questions for each and every person, so that one will no longer need press for admission to private conference with me. For in these writings, they will find a soothing for their soul and true counsel on every difficulty they encounter in the service of God. Which means that Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad, took the time to consider the challenges of so many different people, so that anyone who opens the Tanya in the future can find direction in how to serve God. It's an incredible book. I don't believe there is a book that was written in this way other than the Tanya. And therefore the Rebbe writes to this young man that I'm sure you have a Tanya, and you should find in the Tanya the answers to your question. And the Rebbe says, as it says here, I also trust that your edition of the Tanya has the index of topics, which will help you in your search. Now, prior to 1954, 4 years earlier, the Tanya had never been translated, and there was no index of topics. Interestingly, the Rebbe was the one who compiled this index of topics that now is found in the back of the Tanya. And it goes through any concept. If I want to look at meditation, it will tell me all the places I can find meditation. If I want to talk about love, fear, challenge, my evil inclination, joy, every topic that I want to cover, it has in the index of topics in the Tanya. So the first thing the Rebbe wants, and this is a copy of the Mafteach, the index of topics, compiled by the Rebbe in 1953. And you see over here, there are different talks about different topics that are found, and names and other things that are found within the book of the Tanya. Continue the letter. Now, in response to your question regarding what is written and told about those who at a very young age were already renowned as prodigies and great Torah scholars, remember, this was part of his challenge, that he found that many people who we read about or hear about who were great Torah scholars were already known as great Torah scholars when they were younger. What is the point in questioning why no two minds are the same? Especially in light of what is explained in the 4th chapter of Tanya, that a person's understanding of Torah depends on the extent of their mental capacity and the supernal root of their soul. So there are two things here that are very important. One is one's mental capacity, and based on one's mental capacity, they have the ability to understand the Torah. So no two people are alike. Actually was discussing, related to this week's Torah portion, on Sunday morning at our men's meditation and tefillin, how there are, in this week's Torah portion, we talk about the 3 miracles in the desert. The 2 of the 3 miracles in the desert were given to the Jewish people in the merit of the 3 siblings Moshe, Aharon, and his sister Miriam. Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. There were three miracles. The miracle that came to the Jewish people in the merit of Moshe was the manna. The miracle that happened in the merit of Aaron was the manna. Was the clouds, and the clouds of glory that protected the Jewish people. And the miracle that happened in the merit of Miriam was the well of water. So in this week's Torah portion, we talk about how about the passing of Aaron, and how when Aaron and Miriam passed away, these miracles ceased from the Jewish people for a very short amount of time before they came back. And they came back now in the merit of Moses. So after the passing of Aaron and Miriam, the miracles all three miracles were in the merit of Moses. But these three things of the clouds, the manna, and the water represent Torah. Specifically, the clouds of glory, which are external, protect a person, so too the Torah protects us. The manna represents the Torah which we internalize. Now, when the manna was eaten by the people, it's very interesting actually, that everyone was able to taste the manna differently. So for one person, the taste might have been pizza. For another person, sushi. For another person, the manna might have tasted like dessert, ice cream, or strawberries, whatever you wanted. It says for tzaddikim, it was better tasting. For those who weren't righteous, it wasn't as tasty. This represents how Torah, the intellect of Torah, is digested, is internalized by different people differently, which relates very much to this idea in this letter. The protection of the Torah is equal by all of us. So regardless of how much Torah I study, if I study for 5 minutes a day, because that's all I could do, that's all that I'm allowed, that my time allows, and that's all my understand, and I study to the amount that my understanding allows me to, so I'm going to have the same protection as someone who is able to study day and night, because the clouds, the protection with the Torah are equal for everyone. So the Torah is from the cloud perspective, everything's equal, but when it comes to understanding, it depends on the extent of one's mental capacity and the supernal root of their soul. As Tanya chapter 30 explains, continuing the letter, the meaning of the Mishnah: be humble before every person, that every person possesses a quality in which they are greater than their fellows. And I'll explain that in a moment. Similarly, the Tanya notes in section 7 of Igeret HaKodesh that a person's success in any given mitzvah is because it so arose in the divine will, which means our success in doing a mitzvah, whether we become greater at a mitzvah or not, it doesn't depend on us, but depends on the will of God. So let's understand this being humble before every person. So we all know what this is, right? What's this picture on the right? Michael, good evening. When Michael breaks the matzah on Pesach, he gets a perfect break, right? I hope not. We're not supposed to get a perfect break. Michael goes like this, right? Karate chop. Okay, so when we break the matzah, so it's supposed to be one large piece and one small piece. Why? Because the matzah represents the poor man's bread, and the idea is that a poor man never knows when his next meal is going to be, and so he breaks the matzah in half. He keeps the smaller piece for now, not knowing when his next meal will be. He puts away the larger piece of matzah. That's the idea of the matzah that we put away. We also put it away for the afikomen, which represents the matzah that they would eat in the time of the temple with the, okay. So the story is told that the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, who the Rebbe was named after, his name was Menachem Mendel, I was also named after the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe. He was known as the Tzemach Tzedek, which was after the book that he wrote. Tzemach Tzedek also has the same numerical value as the name Menachem Mendel. So the story is told that once at a Seder he was leading, someone broke the matzah. The guy breaks the matzah and he starts to look at the matzah. Apparently, he broke it into two even pieces. And he's putting them next to each other, trying to figure out which one is bigger. Now, in Yiddish or in Hebrew, bigger is also the same word as greater. In Hebrew, it's gadol, is the same as great or big. In Yiddish, grois could also mean greatness or big. In Hebrew, we have a different way of saying so big and great. Well, you could say he's a big person, but you'd usually use the word great. But in Yiddish and in Hebrew, it goes better. So the Tzemach Tzedek asked him what he's doing, and the Tzemach Tzedek said, a great one that needs to be measured is not really great. If you have to look at something and try to measure whether or not it's great, it can't be that great. So it says that we have to be humble in front of everyone. And the question is it possible to truly be humble in front of everyone? What if I, and so before I get into that, the message here, I forgot about this slide, so let me go in order. So before we talk about greatness and how to achieve greatness, or how to be humble in front of others, the question that we have to ask ourselves is not how great can I be, how wealthy can I become, but what will I achieve with that which I am given? Which means I could have $1 million and I could have $100. And if I use the $1 million properly, then I've achieved greatness. I've done what I need to do. If I have $1 million and I haven't done what I'm supposed to achieve with what I'm given, then I'm better off with $100. So each and every one of us has been given what we need in life, a different measure. And whatever we have, that's what we need to use in order to create and to achieve whatever we need to achieve. And a lot of times in life, especially younger people, tend to compare themselves to others. If I want to be great, and I know someone who was a great wealthy man from being in a certain business, so that's where I want to go. Forget my talents, but my eye is on the money or on his achievement. So the idea here is to recognize that that my greatness will not come from what I'm able to accumulate, but what I'm able to do with whatever I have, with my strengths and whatever I accumulate. So what will you create? What will you achieve with what you've been given? Okay, so back to be humble before every person. So if I am the smartest, wealthiest, or strongest man in the world, how can I be humble in front of everyone? What if if I'm the strongest person in the world and I'm in front of someone who is extremely weak? Can I then be strong? Michael, can you name, I'm just kidding, but can you name everybody on the picture? Okay, just for fun. I don't know if it's right, but I just Googled, well, I knew Einstein, but I just Googled the wealthiest man and the strongest man, and these are the pictures that I got. Maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, am I right? But the point is, how can I, if I'm the strongest person, if I'm the smartest person, if I'm the wealthiest person, if I'm the person with the most influence, how can I be humble before every single person? And this is very important to understand and to appreciate. And I think this is a tremendous lesson, that we each have a unique mission, and every single one of us, because of our mission, related to our mission, we all have a set of unique challenges, strengths, and blessings that are given to us for us to be able to accomplish our mission. So regardless of where we find ourselves or how we find ourselves, we can be humble in front of someone else by recognizing that regardless of our challenges, we all have strengths and blessings. So the person who's the greatest, could be humble because he looks at the other person and recognizes that the other person, even though they don't have what I have, they have strengths that I don't have. And it's the reverse as well. Everyone has strengths that another person doesn't have, and that can cause us to become humble in front of the other person, recognizing that the other person has a strength that I don't have. In fact, the moment I look at someone, and that's why I put these pictures, who has a challenge that I don't have, I could immediately become humble, not by their weaknesses, because I recognize that within their struggle comes tremendous strengths to balance. So the person in the wheelchair that has a challenge also has strength that I wasn't given for him to be able to overcome his challenge. So if I could look around at people who are less fortunate than me, whether it's spiritually, emotionally, financially, with wisdom, however I want to look at myself, and I could see that other person's challenges, not as a challenge, but something that is in line with their unique strengths, abilities, and blessings, that allows me to become more humble. So the Rebbe continues and says, so I'm surprised by your entire attitude. A person's purpose in life is not to surpass and be greater than someone else. As the Mishnah states, I was created to serve my Creator. If God desires that one person should achieve greatness in the mitzvah of charity, and another person should achieve greatness in Torah learning and so on, then each should fulfill the divine purpose for which they were designated. So we all have strengths, and we all have different unique strengths to fulfill the purpose, the mission that we were given, the greatness in the area that we were given greatness. So if a person, and there's a Hayom Yom that says that if a person was given the ability to become a baker, to bake bread, that person is doing a disservice by going and polishing diamonds. One would think that polishing diamonds is the greatest, is an incredible sensitive and from both the refined job. It's something that I could do and accomplish great things, become wealthy from it. But if a person is polishing diamonds, when what they could contribute to society is bread, then they're doing the wrong thing. They're in the wrong business. So let's understand. So Reb Zusha of Anapali was one of the great Hasidic masters. He once remarked, if I was offered the opportunity to exchange place with the patriarch Abraham, I would decline the offer. What would God get from that? He would still have one Abraham and one Zusha, which means, I heard this a little differently. God is not going to ask me. I heard that he said that when I leave this world, God is not going to ask me, why was I not like Abraham? God's going to ask me, why was I not like Zusha? Because it's not about being the greatest person around. It's about how do I best fulfill my purpose in life? And that's the question that I need to ask myself every single day. And so for one person, again, the person who, for one person, he became great in Torah study, for example, when he was younger, because he had those strengths in that area. But you have to find your strengths and figure out where your strengths are and work on those to be the best that you could be with your strengths. Obviously, all of this applies, as stated in the above cited section of the Geret HaKodesh, only to the question of where a person should place their priority and energy, which means that if I have the ability to bake bread, that's where I should put my energy and priority. But nevertheless, I should still do spiritually every mitzvah, for every Jew is obligated in all 613 mitzvot, and in the study of Torah, which is the equivalent of them all. So regardless of where my energy is and what my focus is, because I have figured out that my strength is in a certain area, nonetheless, I have the responsibility for all of the 613 mitzvahs, and particularly in the study of Torah, which is the equivalent of them all. And the Rebbe's secretary signed off on the letter. There's a PS to this letter. I trust that you know about the daily study schedule of Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya. In any case, be diligent in following them from here on. Also, make sure to give a few cents to charity each weekday morning before prayer. These things of the Rebbe of studying Chumash and saying Tehillim, the daily chapter of Tehillim, and studying the daily section of Tanya, as well as giving charity each and every day, is something that the Rebbe encouraged very, very much, especially when people ask blessings for spiritual accomplishments, that these have an effect on our spiritual growth and self-enhancement and so on. The Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya have a tremendous effect on us, as well as that does the act of giving charity every day. So that's the end of the letter. What happens is, one of the things that I was thinking about when I was reading the letter, that often our ego gets to us because, and when it sees someone do well in a certain area, we feel that we should also do well in that area, and that is our ego. Because our ego, if we see someone who in our eyes seems big, we also want to be big. Now, sometimes it could be a benefit, but sometimes, and many times, it actually holds us back, because our ego sometimes pushes us to pursue things that to pursue things that that you excel in and only that. So therefore, we'll focus on that one thing. So the Rebbe was saying that we have to do all 613 mitzvot, which means even when you know that you're the baker of bread, don't try to only do that. And if there's an opportunity to do something else, to push that away, spiritually, I'm talking about. So if I have an opportunity to accomplish something else, I say, well, I'm better at this, and therefore let me not try to pursue another area where I'm not good at. That's something that's ego and doesn't let us grow, because we could grow in more than one area. Just because there's one area that's our strength does not mean that we shouldn't push ourselves in other areas as well. And this is something that we could apply. Yeah, I'm just thinking about personal things that sometimes that we don't want to pursue something because we feel intimidated because we're not so good at it. But yet once we pursue them, we realize that we shouldn't neglect things that we're not necessarily good at this moment. Okay. And I want to just finish off that the Rebbe seems to have sensed that this particular boy did have an aptitude for achieving greatness in Torah learning. So he encourages him in this direction by ending with a quote of the Mishnah, extolling the greatness of Torah learning. Torah learning is the equivalent of them all. So the Rebbe was sort of trying to encourage him. So the Rebbe, first of all, says, don't compare yourself to anybody else. Recognize that you have your own strengths and your own abilities. You have to focus, most importantly, on your ability. But you shouldn't, at the same time, neglect other areas of growth. And then the Rebbe says, but remember that Torah is equivalent to all, which means Torah is something you should also focus on, even if you don't find success. And what's very interesting is that this young man, I don't know who it is, but I guess JLI, in preparing this letter and putting together some points about this letter, tells us that, in case you're wondering what this teenager ended up doing with his life, today he is a renowned Rosh Yeshiva, head of an academy for advanced Torah learning. So he obviously took the Rebbe's words to heart and focused on his abilities, and eventually became something of greatness. So again, we have to, what's the takeaway from this letter? Number one, we shouldn't compare ourselves to others. If we see others succeed in life, we should remember that we all have our own strengths and abilities. While we focus on our own strengths and abilities, at the same time, we shouldn't neglect other areas of growth. And we should all make Torah an important part of our life, because Torah is something that is, even though we all may learn it on a different pace and a different amount and understand it differently, but Torah is something that is applicable and a benefit to each and every single person.